Hey guys, welcome back to My So-Called Mom Life Part 2. We're going to actually be building that wall that we talked about today. If you haven't watched Part 1, you should go back and check out Part 1. We'll leave a link somewhere right here as well as the description below, so that way you guys can check that out, see why we're building this wall and the different requirements that you need to do in Step 1. So let's get that going here for you. And I've already got my bottom pieces cut. I actually am going to be doubling up on the bottom one. You do not have to do that with you. Standard is usually just one base plate. I'm going to be doubling up on my base plate because I actually have shorter 2x4s, 8-footers, and I need just over 8 foot. So what I'm going to do is actually double up my base plate because that'll help me save on lumber instead of going and buying 10-foot boards and cutting them down. So I'll have 2 top plates, 2 base plates. It won't affect anything as far as the wall is concerned. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. So that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start by taking one of my base plates. They're not screwed together yet. They're not connected to the ground. And I'm going to do my base plate, my studs for my wall. The studs are the ones that run vertically, and then my top plate. Screw all those together, and then we'll screw on that secondary bottom plate before we level it on the wall. So let me grab the next set of 2x4s here. Now, important thing to note, you want your 2x4s to be 16 inches on center. So the first thing we should do is actually mark where our studs are going to go. So we're going to have one stud here that we know is going to be on our end. That's going to be an 1.5 inches thick. So 1.5 inches minus half of that is 3/4, right? So 3/4 is going to be our center line. So if we take that 3/4 and then we go 16 inches, we know that that's going to be the center of our next stud. So if we wanted to, we could mark 3/4, 16 inches and 3/4, and then 15 inches and 1/4. That gives us both sides of our stud, so we know. I'm going to go ahead and just put an X on the middle line. That tells me that's my center. So then 16 plus 16 is 32. So I'll go ahead and mark my next stud there. 32 and 3/4, 31 and 1/4. Put my X. So now I know I need my first stud, second stud, third stud. And then remember on the end I told you we're going to need a king stud and we're going to need a jack stud. So our jack stud's going to go on our very end because that's where we're framing out for the door, is this very end. So we're going to put a stud there. So we're going to go ahead and just swing it around, get my measuring tape on the other end here, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing we did on the other end. 1.5 inches thick stud, okay? And then we know that minus 3/4 is our 3/4 mark. That's our center line. So we know that that's going to be our first stud there. But we're actually going to be putting our king stud, which is going to be the same size as our other studs. Our king stud is actually going to be right next to that. So 3 inches overall is going to be our total. So minus 3/4, our center of that stud is going to be at 2 1/4. It's going to be our center mark. So we should be 1.5 inches difference, which we are. Now, if you take our original third stud, stud number 3, and we move over, we're only 13 inches to our center mark. Well, in fact, not even 13. We're at 12 3/4, excuse me. So obviously we're not 16 inches on center with that, but that's okay. The point is we want to be at 16 inches on center where we can be. And that's just a standard. You can also go 24 inches on center. So most of your floor joists, things like that, will always be 24 inches on center. A wall like this could very well be 24 inches on center because it's not a structural wall. It's just a cosmetic wall, if you will. but the reason that I'm doing 16 inches on center is because on the outside of this wall, on the garage side, I'm going to be hanging tools. So the more studs I have, the better. The inside of the wall, we're going to be possibly putting corrals, if you will, for the animals. So the more studs I have, again, the better framing I can do on the inside. So now that we've got our studs marked out for our bottom plate, it's time to get our 8-foot studs. Now, we won't touch the jack stud just yet. We're going to go ahead and put in the 1, 2, 3, 4 studs, and then we will worry about our jack stud. And I'll show you exactly how we're going to measure and cut our jack stud to length, so that way we frame out our door properly. So let me go ahead and grab the rest of these studs, and I'll show you exactly what we're doing to put them together. All right, so now that we've got our studs all set here in roughly the right place here, I am using 2.5-inch screws. Now, if you have access to a nail gun, you certainly can use like framing nails, or you can use screws. The screws that I have, I just happen to have on hand. They're 2.5-inch deck screws. So I'm going to start by doing this outside board, and I am just making it flush on the outside. And as you can see, it's lined up. I've got my marks ended up perfect. I've got my center mark. I've got my line mark there. Everything's good to go. So I'm going to put a screw from the bottom of plate. I'm going to put one kind of close to the top. I'll bring it in and show you afterwards. And kind of close to the bottom. So I'm going to put 2 screws. The reason we're doing 2, even if you're using nails, is so the board doesn't twist inside the wall. You want at least 2 screws in there, or 2 nails in there, so that way it doesn't twist and it's not floppy, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead. Okay, got my first 2 screws in. Let me bring you a little closer and show you what I mean here. So there you go. You can see there I've got just 2 screws. One not too close to the edge because you don't want the wood to split. Even though this wood is splitting, that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's not splitting because of the nails. And then let me show you how we did our marks. So you can see we're right on our line. There's our center line. We've marked out the next stud, so this stud will fit right in between those lines there. And then you can see we went ahead and put the X on the center. That's just for my own benefit. That's not necessary. You don't even have to mark the lines like this, just kind of roughly where you want your studs. And there's our king and our jack stud. So just an example of how you can do that and mark your studs. Now, I know these are laying flat. They, of course, will not be. You make sure you're putting these on end, just like that. A little blurry there. There we go. Get this in focus. So, and then this one's a little wobbly. Now, important thing to note, the straighter you find these boards when you're picking them out at the lumber yard or the big box store that you're purchasing them from, the straighter you find those boards, the better it's going to be on you. It's going to be a lot easier to get everything in place and stuff. Now, it will frame up nicely when you're done either way, but it's easier if you do it that way. So now that you've seen where our marks are, how we install those boards, let me get these 4 in, these 2 in. I'll show you this last one. You see I've got a little short block there. That's just as a spacer. I'm going to use that here as a spacer when I set my king stud, so that my jack stud, I will then cut that one, cut a new piece for that. So I can set my king stud right now, and then we can set our jack stud afterwards. So I'm just using a little drop piece as a spacer. So that's a quick tip if you are doing it this way. Now that we have our bottom plate in, it's time to install the top plate. So I'll swing you around here a little bit. So you can see now we've got the top of the board. We don't yet have a board on there. I know this other bottom plate is the right size, so I'll just cut a new bottom plate. So we'll go ahead and install our top plate. Now the easiest way to make sure that you have a level 2x4 stud in your wall is to do the same thing we did on the bottom on the top is go ahead and mark our stud placement. Now another thing you can do is you can put a square in here if you happen to have access to a square. You can put either a speed square, that's just like a triangle that you put in there. You can do it that way, or you can put in a regular square. You can put in that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and do it by marking out each one of my studs and where they go, screwing them in, and I will show you the wall. All right, so we've got our top plate screwed on, our bottom plate is screwed in. Now you will notice here on the top plate that I did actually cut it to the length of the king stud. Now, if you were actually going for to frame out the door along with your wall, unlike I am due to space, then you would just not cut your top plate. It would run the whole length. But what we're going to need to do is cut that so we can retrofit it. Now, we have one more bottom plate because you don't typically have it, but I do in this case due to spacing. So I'm going to go ahead and just screw on that bottom plate from the top side. I'm going to screw down, and then what's going to have to happen is the concrete screws that I use are going to need to be longer as a result of it. So I'm going to screw from this side into that plate using the same screws and just attach that plate, and then we're going to actually put the wall up. Okay, so now you can, with the help of a friend if need be, stand your wall up and get it roughly in place. So it might be a little tight in there. That's a good thing. Just tap it in with a hammer. That's why you want to go top in first. And if you marked your floor for your actual plumb point, then you're just going to tap it into that line. Now I didn't mark my floor here, so because I didn't have a long enough couple of levels, so we're going to actually take our 4-foot level and we're going to tap it in till it's plumb. And right now you can see I'm way out on an angle, which is fine because I'm just now getting it into place. And so I'm just going to kick it in with my feet a little bit, get it in there, get it roughly to where I think it needs to be. Now the other thing is you want to make sure that you're staying in measurement with your wall. Now I happen to be lining it up with this outside edge here, so that should be fine. Now that my wall is roughly in there, I'm going to throw this on there, and ironically that is perfectly plumb. This one is not, however, so we're going to have to, when we screw it in at the top, we're going to have to make sure that we adjust for that a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty good. So what I'll do when I continue my doorway is draw a straight line across, so that way I know I make sure I keep myself in the same spot. But either way, we should be running along this joist, so that's the important part. Now I want to go flush with this, a little back from this outside edge and not flush with it, because I want my drywall to even up with this outside edge of drywall. So that's why my 2x4 back there, or my top header, is just a little off. Now I'll be using 1/2 inch drywall, so I'm only going to go about a 1/2 inch. The right thing to do would be to mark that on your wall at the top, and then that way you can plumb as you go down. Now you don't need to do this part, screw this one into this side wall, but that's what I'm going to do just to hold everything in place. And then I'll screw in some top screws. And then the most important part is getting your screws down into your concrete. I will be using concrete screws for that, pre-drilling using concrete screws. I may have to go out and buy some that are longer because I had to double up on that bottom plate as we talked about. But typically you could also use a nail gun. They make specific nail guns that actually use a cartridge that's actually like a shotgun cartridge, and I've used those in the past. They work great for this. They go much faster, so if you have the time, that's the way to go, or if you have access to that tool or want to rent one. But I'm going to be screwing through this concrete with actual drill bit and drilling it in. So, but let me go ahead and get this thing plumbed up and screwed in. But you can see already we've got the start of our first wall. That's very exciting, because that makes you feel like the rest. I know I have not put in my jack stud like we talked about yet. That's on purpose. We will cover that after we build the second wall. We will cover how to put in the jack stud, frame out the header for the door with our crippler studs and our header studs there. And then we'll actually go through framing the door, running electrical, so on and so forth. So that's it for today, guys. Stay tuned for some more in the future. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe. Go ahead and like this video, share it out to somebody else. This is something that is very passionate for us, is just getting this rescue up and going for the animals. We will be heating and insulating this as well for the animals. So, you know, that's where I'll show you guys all of that along the way. If you guys want to help out, donate. You know, there's a super thanks on my channel, on my wife's channel. Just help her get subscribers so that way we can build this channel. Or if you want to contact us via email, so on and so forth. Really appreciate it, guys. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you guys are staying safe.